You have returned to the dungeon, not for comfort, and certainly not for absolution. You return because the silence has become too loud, and the echoes of the battle still rage within the confines of your own mind. You seek a final lesson, a grand, unified theory of your own destruction and subsequent and inconvenient survival. You believe that by understanding the architecture of your prison, you might finally dismantle it. A noble, if naive, ambition. Pay attention. You began, as all such tragedies do, with a foundation of hope. You believed you were crafting a sanctuary, a refuge of loyalty and love, built brick by brick with your own devotion. This belief demanded a price, and so you invested everything. Not just your currency, which she accepted with the casual entitlement of a queen accepting tribute from a conquered land, but your sanity. You paid for her peace of mind with your own. You funded her stability while yours was systematically dismantled. You provided the canvas and the paint, under the illusion the masterpiece being created was a shared one. For 7 years, you toiled in service to this grand design. This was the foundational lie upon which all subsequent treacheries were built. The architect was a saboteur. While you were building, she was excavating, tunneling beneath the foundation, laying charges set to detonate at the precise moment of her choosing. The first tremors were subtle. A phone angled away in the darkness. A name spoken with a familiarity that did not belong to you. A coldness in a touch that was once a fire. These were the hairline fractures in the facade, the preliminary warnings of a catastrophic structural failure. In response, your instincts, that most primitive and reliable of instruments, began to scream. They screamed of deceit, of betrayal, of a truth so monstrous you dared not give it a name. You did what any rational mind does when faced with the irrational. You sought evidence. You began to test the walls, to tap on the floorboards, to listen for the hollow sound of a lie. Your mistake was to assume you were dealing with an equal. You had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the entity with whom you were dealing. Mute believed you were in a relationship. You were, in fact, in a laboratory, and you were the sole subject of the experiment. Every time you presented a factor-suspicious message, a timeline that did not align, a gut feeling that could no longer be ignored, you were met not with denial, but with a far more potent form of dark magic, gaslighting. It was her masterpiece. She did not merely refute your evidence. She invalidated your senses. Your correct observations were diagnosed as paranoia. Your logical deductions were labeled as insanity. Your pain was prescribed as the symptom of your own inherent brokenness. She held up a warped mirror and convinced you that the grotesque reflection was your own face. This inexorable pressure forced the slow, agonizing process of self-immolation. You turned the fire of your suspicion inward. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps you were the monster. Perhaps your love was too demanding, your mind too fractured, your perception too flawed. You began to apologize for the crimes she was committing. You apologized for needing honesty. You apologized for expecting loyalty. You apologized for your own existence when it proved inconvenient to her carefully constructed double life. This is the genius of the master manipulator. They do not need to build a cage for you. They convince you to build it for yourself, and then they convince you that the bars are for your own protection. And you made a desperate, rational bid for freedom. This act of self-preservation was something the parasite could not abide. Just as you reached the door, she deployed her most potent and saccharine poison, the love bombing. The letters, filled with performative anguish and promises of an eternal future. She was already plotting to spend with another. The tears, calibrated for maximum effect. The sudden, overwhelming affection designed to short-circuit your resolve and remind you of the fantasy you were so desperate to believe in. She did not want you. She wanted to prevent you from not wanting her. It is a crucial distinction. The gambit worked. You returned not to a sanctuary, but to the next circle of hell, believing the poison was the antidote. The deception, of course, escalated. It had to. A liar's reality is a fragile thing, requiring constant, frantic maintenance. The triangulation began in earnest. Ghosts of others, past and present, summoned to keep you in a perpetual state of competition. You were no longer just a partner. You were an anchor, a placeholder, a stable variable against which she could measure her chaos. She spoke of her ex, the one she was just friends with, the one she was actively betraying you with. As a wounded soul, you were meant to pity, not suspect. She cultivated new prospects online, whispering to them of the true nightmare. Her life with you had become, all while lying in the bed your labor had paid for. She was living a dozen lives, all of them predicated on the singular, foundational lie that you were the only one. The sheer weight of these lies eventually became too much to bear. The evidence became too overwhelming to ignore, even for a mind so thoroughly conditioned to self-doubt. The final, irrefutable proof arrived. Not a suspicion, but a fact. A name on a screen. A confession from an accomplice, delivered with the casual arrogance of a victor. This was the lightning strike of recognition, the horrifying, gut-wrenching moment when 7 years of carefully constructed reality shatters into a million pieces. The moment you knew, with sickening certainty, that you were not mad. You had been right all along. This clarity did not set you free. The truth was the trigger for the final discard. The moment you became inconvenient to her narrative, the moment you could no longer be gaslit into submission, you ceased to be useful. The experiment was over. The subject was to be disposed of. The discard was not a quiet departure. It was a detonation designed for maximum collateral damage. It was followed by the most vicious act of all, the smear campaign. She, the architect of the ruin, donned the mask of the victim one last time. Her family, her flying monkeys, the complicit enablers who had watched her performance for years, joined the chorus. They painted you as the monster. They threatened your family. They used your predictable human reaction to 7 years of psychological torture as proof of your inherent instability. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. They set your house on fire and then condemned you for screaming. This final assault precipitated your collapse, utterly, The man you were was incinerated in the blaze of her departure. The financial ruin was swift, a direct consequence of an emotional devastation so profound it left you incapable of rational thought. The gambling addiction was not a flaw in your character. It was a desperate, primal scream for control in a universe where you had just learned you had none. It was the frantic attempt to win something, anything, in a game where you had just lost everything, including your own identity. You hit the absolute bottom, a hollowed-out ruin, haunted by the ghost of a life that was never real, and stripped of the resources to build a new one. You were, by every conceivable metric, defeated. At the absolute bottom, in the suffocating silence, a different kind of truth begins to germinate, when there is nothing left to lose. This truth does not require validation from anyone else. It is forged, not discovered. You see, the ultimate philosophical lesson of your ordeal was never about her. To fixate on her pathology, her narcissism, her inherent emptiness, is to remain trapped in her narrative, forever playing the role of the victim. The lesson was not she is evil. The lesson is far more profound. The lesson is this: reality is not a fixed state. It is a negotiated contract. For 7 years, you allowed a fundamentally untrustworthy party to dictate the terms of your existence. Her power was never inherent. It was granted. Granted by your hope. Granted by your loyalty. Granted by your refusal to believe that a person could be so profoundly hollow. Your power, then, is not in convincing the world of your truth. It is not in seeking retribution or an apology you will never receive. Your power is in the unilateral cancellation of the contract. It is in the sovereign act of reclaiming your own perception. You survived what was designed to destroy you. This makes you no longer the subject of her experiment. You are the scientist who has now documented its results. Your pain was the crucible, your suffering the fire, and what has emerged is not the broken man she left behind, but a tempered blade. Your retribution is not in harming her, but in rendering her irrelevant. It is in the slow, meticulous, disciplined act of rebuilding your life on a foundation that is solely your own. It is in the creation of a future so bright, so full, so utterly and completely yours, that her memory becomes nothing more than a faint, pathetic shadow. Your task is not an exorcism. It is a factory reset, performed one deliberate, disciplined action at a time. Every lie she told, you will counter with a truth you build. Every dollar she watched you waste, you will earn back with a focus she could never comprehend. Every moment of sanity she stole, you will reclaim through a radical commitment to your own peace. This is the great work. It is not about forgetting. It is about outgrowing. It is about building a castle so vast and strong that the dungeon she left you in becomes nothing more than a forgotten cellar. This is the alchemy of survival. You do not turn lead into gold. You turn your own ashes into a phoenix. Lesson over.